Robin Adair Gregory. Birth date, October 7, 1945. Born in Washington, D.C.
And so you were born in Washington, D.C. Okay, I want to ask about first Washington, D.C. Okay. I want to know what Washington, D.C. was like when you were a youth in that city.
It was a Jim Crow town.
Okay, please explain. I know what that means, but yes.
Well, you know, people don't think of Washington as being a southern town, but it is.
Yes,
it's right below the Mason-Dixon line.
Yes.
And so even though we didn't have, you know, signs like they had in the South, like, you know, colored and white and all that kind of business, we knew where we could and could not go. And I grew up in a totally black environment. I never saw any white people until I was in college. Never had a relationship or talked to anyone. The only white people I ever talked to was, there was a Jewish family that owned a store in our neighborhood, like a, you know, a corner grocery store. And if we went downtown, you know, we saw white people. But we didn't have any white people in our environment. No teachers, everybody was black. It was totally segregated. And, you know, if you wanted to get an apartment or buy a house or get a job, the paper had a colored and a white section. So you had to look in the colored section for, you know, anything that you wanted to do in terms of that sort of thing. We were all aware of it, you know, but I felt like I had a great upbringing. I didn't really miss the other people. You know, I was aware of segregation. And so Washington, for instance, black people could not drive buses. So it was only white bus drivers. So, you know, there was that thing. And
you could ride the buses? But
we could ride the buses.
Did you have a designated seating
No,
area?
there was no designated seating. Yeah, that was not happening. You know. So everything was understood and subtle, you know. Also, well, just to add this on, I spent every summer at my grandparents' house in Atlantic City. You know, 3 months out of the year I was with them, and it was the same situation there. Just an invisible line that we all knew, you know, not to go over.
But I've heard that others describe Washington, D.C. of that time as a kind of a magical place in terms of now looking at African American community as a sort of a culture of Rome, you know, as really a very significant place for African American. Can you say something about that?
Well, you know, the migration of black people in the United States kind of went in 2 or 3 different directions depending on what southern state they were fleeing from. So, you know, for instance, Texans, Louisianians, and people like that came to California. Alabamans and people like that went up to Chicago. People from like Georgia, North Carolina went up to Washington, D.C. or New York. And so, you know, my parents' generation were migrants, you know. And so that's basically, I guess that was the magical part of it all, because it was it was like almost 85% black in Washington, you know. And so it was very segregated, but, you know, we were in an atmosphere where we were just in our own, you know, community, you know. So it was magical. There was a lot of music there, you know, and arts, and it was a place to be. Actually, it was a lot of energy in Washington.
Your parents came from where in the South?
My mother came from Savannah, Georgia. My father came from Atlantic City, New Jersey. He didn't come from the South.
Okay.
Yeah. So he came there to go to college. Yeah. And she came there to get a job.
You know, it's interesting when you explain how you know, you were among yourselves,
Mhm.
and there were whites,
Yeah.
but it didn't matter.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I'm reminded of Toni Morrison's
Yes.
The Gays,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
The white gays.
The white gays.
And so you didn't
We
have
didn't
that.
have the white
How
gays.
wonderful.
You know, we'll get into this later maybe,
Sure.
but I feel like integration, the way that it happened, was very bad for black people. You know, we had our communities, you know, all strata of people lived in our communities, so we got to see successful people and unsuccessful people, you know. And so we were all there together, and in Washington, you know about Northwest, Southwest, Southeast, and all that. Black people were basically in Northwest, Northeast, Southeast. They weren't much in Southwest. Before I was born, in the 40s, Southwest was a black community. It was called Foggy Bottom. And then white people started moving into there, became Georgetown and that area over there. So then there were no black people there when I was growing up. You know, we just didn't go over there. It was just, you know.
Foggy Bottom, if I may, are you referring to that around where the Kennedy Center is?
Yeah, that was like, you know,
Right?
Southwest on the,
Yeah.
and then if you went up further, you got into Georgetown.
Georgetown.
Yeah, that was Southwest.
But Foggy Bottom was mostly then
Yes,
predominantly
yes,
black.
yes, yes.
But I think we should stay with what you just said about segregation. That in some ways it was better.
It was better because of the way they inflicted it upon us, integration upon us. You know, it's just like they really just, you know, how can I put this? They always wanted people to lose their identity, so to speak, and to be like them. You know, that wasn't happening as I was growing up. We just were who we were. There were some people, you know, because of the way that we were all treated, some people were ashamed of being black. And so, you know, they wanted, there's a whole colorism within, you know, the black community. You know, like the paper bag test, I guess you've heard of the paper bag test.
No, I haven't.
You know, the lighter you were, the more you were accepted.
Yes, yes. Is that this high yellow?
The high yellow, you know,
Yes.
there was high yellow, there were all shades per
They
me.
were, okay.
There was red bones, there were high yellows, they were, you know. And so the paper bag test had to do with black people stratifying society by color, and you couldn't get into an event if you were darker than a paper bag. It's called the paper bag test. They would actually hold a paper bag up to you to see if your complexion was lighter or darker.
Who would? Who?
Other black people.
Other black, okay.
You know, like having a cotillion or a party or
Got
an
it.
event,
Yes,
you
yes.
know.
Interesting.
Yes. So, you know, we had our stuff, you know, we took on a lot of that stuff. You know, I mean, that's what you do, I guess, when you're co-opted. But I say that integration was bad for us because we couldn't be who we were in that context. We had to be like them, and in terms of everything, you know. So people strove to be as much as possible like white people, you know. And then so people left the communities, you know, because now they could go to places they couldn't go before, and a lot of businesses and communities collapsed because black people were leaving. And that's how we got the so-called ghettos and stuff, you know, because those people were left behind because they didn't have the means to get out of there, you know. But it was actually, you know, it was, yeah.
So I wanted to just now go back to your childhood. if
Okay.
I may. Can you just describe who were your grandparents? Who did you spend time with? What was childhood like?
Well, in D.C., how can I put this? I had two sets of grandparents. I had grandparents that, you know, lived in, my paternal grandparents lived in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And my grandfather was a scholar and a professor.
Wow.
And an innovator, you know, like he taught at Howard University when he was a young man, and he was instrumental in creating the theater there and different
Could
departments.
you give us his name? I'm sorry to
Yes,
interrupt.
His name was Thomas Montgomery Gregory. Yeah, and
I've seen a picture of him.
yes,
In the Washington Post.
yes, you
He
know,
gave me the, yes.
and he was one of the first black people to go to Harvard. Yeah, so he was in the, I think it was 1910 or something like that. Yeah, and you know, he created alliances with a lot of very important people there, and the way
Harvard.
at Harvard.
University.
He was a writer. He was you know, he was a scholar and an intellectual. My grandmother was a very creative person. She was from Austin, Texas, and she was an artist. She painted and designed things, and it was a really good cook. And she was kind of a homebody, though. She didn't go out much. You know, she had a beautiful yard where she grew flowers and different fruits and stuff. And my brother and I were the only cousins who spent the entire summer with them. My other cousins just came up with their parents on their parents' vacation. But I got to spend 3 months out of the year with them, and I was really close to them. And they were my grandmother was very instrumental in my upbringing. My mother used to love to send me there because I would come back speaking proper English. You know, when you're a kid, you just take on the colloquialisms and everything. Yeah. My mother's parents lived in Savannah. She lost her mother when she was only 12. And I think it was due to segregation, because I always thought she died of cancer, but I later found out she died of, what are those tumors that women get in their uterus? I can't think of it.
Fibroids.
Fibroids.
Yeah.
That she had you know, she was bleeding from fibroids, and the closest hospital was a white hospital, but they couldn't take her there. So they took her very far away, and she wound up dying. Yeah. And so we didn't see them as much. You know, first of all, my father never wanted to go to the South, ever. He never wanted to go there. And my mother did convince him once when I was about 3 years old. That's when I first knew about race. Well, maybe I didn't. I'll tell you a story about. Yeah, that is the first, because something happened after that. Because he said to us, "We are not going to stop anywhere. We're going to cook all this food and take it with us. If you have to go to the bathroom, you know, like, you will just stop by the side of the road." And we asked him why, and he explained it to us. You know, that was kind of the first explanation.
How old were you?
I was 3.
Wow. So you went.
So we went, and it was wonderful.
Nice.
Yeah, they were
Why was
just.
it wonderful?
They were wonderful.
Okay.
You know, my grandfather remarried, and you know, my step grandmother. They were just wonderful people. You know, yeah, it was a nice visit, and I cried when I left.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
But again, coming back, you had your own food in the car
Yes,
and everything.
yeah. We just we couldn't stop. It was like not the thing to do.
What was it like as a child to become aware of these things?
You know, the things were not so apparent. When I say that, they weren't as apparent as they are now, because the TV didn't show a lot of this stuff. Sure. But what it was like, you know, I kind of grew up in an environment that was kind of, you know, my parents didn't have a lot of money. So, and then my parents divorced when I was 9 years old, and my father moved to New York. And so we didn't live in upscale neighborhoods or anything. You know, we lived in neighborhoods where it was kind of rough sometimes. It was kind of fearful, you know, a lot of the time when I was growing up.
Can you explain the fear?
You know, boys bothering you, you know, stuff like that, getting people wanting to fight you, these kinds of things. You know, going to school was kind of an ordeal, you know, hoping nobody would try to fight with you. Those kinds of things happened because there were many neighborhoods around, and you know, different kinds of people. Like there were projects there that people came to school, and you know, so different neighborhoods. Like my area that I lived in, my street was very, very nice. It wasn't upscale or anything, but you know,
Where
it
was
was kind of calm.
Yeah.
It was in Southeast. Southeast used to not be so
What was the
rough
name
as it
of the
is now.
street?
Savannah Street.
Okay.
Savannah Street. So we had lived in Northeast first when I was really little, and then we moved to Southeast Savannah Street, where we lived from maybe my 5th grade year through junior high school. And then we moved to Northwest when I was a freshman in high school. So
Your grandparents that you spent summers with, was your grandmother also college educated?
yes,
Where was she?
Fisk University.
And your grandfather?
He went to Harvard.
Oh, he's the one that went.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
And they met at Fisk. He brought a debate team down to Fisk, and he met her there. Yeah, they were really beautiful people.
I was going to say that
Yeah.
must have been quite amazing for that generation.
Yeah.
Well, Harvard, of course,
Mhm.
but even Fisk.
Well, you know, he was from Massachusetts. I don't know if they were from.
Also.
You know, his family was kind of an, I don't know how you call it, but I guess you would call it the black elite intellectual.
Yes, yes, of course.
And my grandmother's family was very interesting. Her father was a very interesting man. He was the son of a white military person by the name of John Hancock, and I always thought it was the John Hancock until I got older. And so he was a slave, and
So your grandfather,
my maternal grandfather. Paternal. I'm sorry, my paternal grandfather. My grandmother on my paternal side, her
Side.
father.
Okay, her father.
Her father. There's a very interesting story about
Yeah.
him. I don't know if you know it, but
I don't.
oh wow. Okay. His mother left with him and went to Ohio when he was about 5 years old. We don't really know what happened there. You know, the father could never acknowledge the son, and he was really a
Because
racist.
He was white.
Yeah, and he was, you know, really a racist. But he was an upstanding person in the community, of course. So they went to Ohio, and somehow the mother died. We don't know how or why. And he was orphaned all by himself, and he lived on Oberlin's campus with this family, Oberlin College.
Yes.
And when he got older, he decided to go back to Austin, which was kind of crazy. You know, why would he go back? Yeah, but he went back there and he became very prominent. You know, Republican Party back then was the party that supported black people and emancipation and all that. So he became a Republican. He had an ale house, which is where they used to meet. People used to meet in ale houses and saloons and stuff to talk politics and all that. And so he had a saloon called the Black Elephant. And so, you know, that happened. And his house is a historical landmark, and so is that saloon in Austin. It's still there.
And his name was?
His name was Hugh Barry Hancock.
Hancock.
My grandmother's maiden name was Hancock, yes. So they were just, you know, interesting people, all of them, and, you know, and our family was, you know, a family of intellectuals, I guess you would say. Yeah, so.
So growing up in D.C., can you tell me a little bit about, you decide childhood, adolescence, it would be nice to hear what it was like. What were the fears? What were the good times?
Okay.
What was it like?
Well, okay, we lived in Northeast when I was really little. Well, we had lived in Northwest when I was a toddler, and then we moved to Northeast, and you know, I had to go to school for the first time, and I remember having to walk by myself, which was frightening to me. You know, I was all by myself.
You were 5, 6?
Five.
Sure.
Well, I was 4 when I first went to school. I was 4 And I was 4 and I was put in kindergarten, and after a week they said she's too advanced and they put me in the first grade.
And this is all African Americans?
All African Americans,
Okay.
all, everybody.
Yeah.
So then I was in the first grade, and then after 2 weeks they said, oh no, she needs to go to second grade. But my mother wouldn't allow it because then I would be ahead of my brother. And she didn't want that to happen. Because, you know, like when they put me in the first grade, we were in the same grade. We were only 16 months apart. We were in the same grade, but then they wanted to put me in the second grade, and she said, well, that's not good, you know. So she didn't allow that to happen. But I remember we had very good teachers. We really had very good teachers. The first school only went to the third grade, and then the second school was fourth and fifth grade.
Do you remember the name of the school?
The first school was called Burville Elementary School. It was, and then the second school was, let me think about this. Merit. It's called Merit. Yeah, and we had really good teachers. We really did.
This is part of that amazing community that the African Americans have formed, right?
Yeah, yeah. You know, we learned Black history in our school. It wasn't, you know, something exotic or anything. And so then I was there until the fifth grade, and that's when my mother moved us to Southeast, and I went to the fifth grade at Moton Elementary School.
You said we learned about African American history. What did that involve?
You know, they taught us about all the innovations that African Americans had done. You know, the major culture was busy explaining how we didn't ever do anything.
Yes.
We're just dumb animals, you know. Like, you know, so, you know, I learned about different people that did different things. You know, scientists and people like that. I mean, we had them in our family. Like, you know, my Aunt Nora was married to Charles Drew's. I mean, my Aunt Nora was Charles Drew's sister, was married to my uncle, and so, you know, there was a lot of information, and I remember reading a lot independently about, you know, Black people's achievements and contributions to our society, you know, and so, you know, like when integration came, they didn't do all that, you know, like we were just tolerated, I guess, and I never went to an integrated school. You know, I just never did. I went to a Black college.
You went to
Howard.
Yes, yes.
You know, and some white people did go to Howard, but not very many.
Sure. So all through elementary, middle school, high school, Washington, D.C., African American experience, excellent teachers, excellent education.
Now in high school, we had some
Which
white
was
teachers.
where?
McKinley Technical High School.
Ah, okay. And you had
We had white teachers in the high school.
a lot?
No, a few.
A few.
A few. What happened was, I think it was the year before I came, that's when integration started happening, and all the white kids fled. There were like about 5 or 6 white kids left. And they kind of hung together. Nobody really knew them.
We're talking
1958.
58, okay.
1958.
As things are getting, there's more integration.
They left. You know, they didn't want their kids going to school with us.
Yeah.
And so we had some white teachers, yes. But mostly they were Black teachers.
And great education.
Great education.
And then you went to Howard
Then I went to Howard.
University. And Howard must have been wonderful as well.
It was.
Yeah.
You know, it was, and you know, I was like a legacy student because it was our family. You know, went.
Yes.
Yeah. So.
How many generations? Who was the first?
Well, it was my grandfather.
It was your grandfather.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that would have been in the early 1900s.
Yeah.
Right.
Early 1900s, and then Sheila went to Howard.
Sheila,
my Aunt Sheila.
your Aunt Sheila, okay?
So, you know, and then I went. You know,
Okay,
like,
wonderful.
yeah. I don't know if any other cousins went.
What was Howard like then?
It was very exciting. You know, well, when I first got there, it was kind of, it was very conservative, let's put it like that, because There was a whole plantation mentality in Washington, D.C. because Washington, D.C. was not an autonomous city. It was run by a group of Southern senators. It was called the District Committee. They ran Washington, D.C.
Were
A
they,
bunch of white Southern senators, very
were they
racist.
Republican or Democrat? Do you know?
Democrats, because the
They were
Democrats were the
Democrats,
racists
yeah,
then. They were the
racist,
ones in
yeah,
the South.
Exactly.
And so, so it was conservative, you know, and Patricia Harris, who later became an ambassador, was our dean of women. And I remember when we first went there, you know, all the women were there, and she was telling us how to behave like ladies. And
Was someone telling that to the men?
I don't know, probably not. You know, but and then, you know, when the civil rights movement happened, in which I was very active, a lot of action was happening on the campus.
Now you need to speak about that. But before we go there, let's remember this. I'm sorry, Malik tells me this, that you were a beauty queen
Yeah,
at Howard.
At
Can
Howard.
you explain that? Was it homecoming?
it was homecoming.
What
I
year
kind of
was
want,
that?
well, let's go back because
Sure.
you asked me stuff about my
Yeah, I
childhood.
did, yes.
And one incident I just wanted to point out to you was when Emmett Till was murdered. You know, I remember it clearly. As I was outside playing, you know, we were outside jumping rope and all that. And my brother had a Jet magazine, and he just came screaming, you know, like with this magazine, with this whole news about this. And we all stopped and we looked at it, and, you know, it just was really affected us.
And it was the photograph
Yeah,
of him
yeah,
in the
yeah,
casket?
yes, and what had happened,
Yeah.
you know. So things like that we did hear about these things. And also when
So what was it like as a child to see that?
well, you know, what could we do? It was shocking and upsetting.
Did your parents, was there a conversation?
Yes, you know, my father was very conscious of things, you know. When Martin Luther King first started out with his bus boycott, he talked about it a lot. And so, you know, yeah, it was. We did talk about it. You know, we were aware of it. Now we were aware, like there was, you know, on TV there was American Bandstand, and there was also a dance show that was local called the Milt Grant Show in Washington, and it was very segregated. So no black people were ever on American Bandstand dancing, but the Milt Grant Show had black people could come on Tuesdays. We called it Black Tuesday.
Amazing.
So, you know, there was no integrating the dancing. No, that was not going to happen, you know. Yeah, so.
So your childhood, you were telling
Yeah,
me.
we were aware of it, but, you know, like I say, we were in our bubble, so to speak, and it wasn't like, I think the people, you know, who had to first integrate the schools, you know, that was terrible. You know, what happened to them, you know, the screaming and the taunting and the throwing of objects at them and all that. And that was really awful for them, you know, so we heard about things and we knew about things. And then when I was living on Savannah Street, a boy that we knew who was like a paper boy, you know, he got up every morning really early to deliver papers, and he would go across, you know, like at the edge of our neighborhood was a white neighborhood, and it was a golf course. And he had to deliver papers to the white community, and so he would go through the golf course. And one morning he was going, you know, it was dark, still dark, going through the golf course, and he was killed by a policeman. That was the first kind of incident like that I heard about, you know, like someone we knew shot by a policeman for no reason, you know, other than he was just a black boy, you know, like crossing a white golf course. Yeah, so, you know, things like that did happen, and we heard about them. And so we were very conscious of it, you know, we were conscious of it.
What was it like in your community in terms of policing?
Well, you know, we had black police in D.C.
Sure, of course. I mean,
Yeah.
yes. But I mean,
So
did you have internal, were there police officers that dealt mostly with your community versus the whites?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
We had precincts, you know, different
Yes.
precincts, and so, you know, there was a precinct in our area, and it was all black cops, you know, and when my
And it
mom,
was okay,
yeah,
right?
And my, you know, after my mother got divorced and all, she dated several policemen.
Okay.
So I knew some policemen, you know, like, you know.
But it was only when there was, if they were in a white area, like the...
Yes, you know. You know, first we were just aware of it happening in the South.
Yeah.
We were not really, as children, we were not aware of that particular, we were aware that, you know, like down south, the policemen, you know, they would kill you. We knew about that, you know.
I'm sorry to talk about these
That's all right.
subjects, but did you...
I don't have a problem.
There must have been talk about lynchings.
There was. There were lynchings. You know, they talked about lynchings, and we were aware of them. And, you know, it was scary. We kind of thought that all this stuff was happening just in the South. And, you know, we weren't, you know, the deep South. And we weren't aware of anything like lynching happening in the North. We weren't aware of it anyway. You know, other kinds of things happening in the North. You know, we were aware of terrible policemen in New York. New York had terrible policemen, you know, that used to really just be awful to the people of Harlem, that kind of thing. We were aware of that, you know. And we also knew that we really didn't want to meet any white policemen there in D.C. because we all knew that they recruited them from the South and they were very racist, you know. So
as a child, you were aware of all these kind of trigger points, right?
But you know, you just go on with your life.
Of course, of course.
And because we didn't have to interact with them all that much, you know, we didn't experience it. I remember a funny moment. There was an amusement park outside of D.C. called Glen Echo Park.
Oh yes, I know it.
And we used to see the ads, you know, but we couldn't go there. It was, you know, segregated. We couldn't go there. And then when they finally integrated it and we went there, it was so anticlimactic. It was like, what, you know, they were saving this just for themselves. It's like really not all that great.
Isn't that in Maryland?
Yes.
Yeah, I've been by it. Yeah, I wondered about that. Yeah. So once you got there,
yeah,
it wasn't that exciting.
Big deal. You know? we had actually traveling carnivals come to our neighborhoods. You know, Ferris wheels and all that. You know, carnivals and circuses and stuff. So we went to those.
So really, you weren't missing out on much.
Well, no. You know, because I would tell white people later in life, you know, like I grew up in this, they would, oh, and I said, I didn't miss you, really. I just didn't miss you. You know?
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Other things you want to tell me about childhood? You wanted to go back.
Yeah, let me see if I remember anything. Oh, here was an incident. I have a tan right now. I'm a little lighter than this. And when I was about 4 or 5, I remember some girls telling me I was white. And I got real upset and I ran in the house and I said, Mom, they're saying I'm white. They're saying I'm white. She said, well, you're not white. She said, look at the stove. Are you that color? I said, no. She said, then go out and play. It was an issue, and I remember being upset that someone said I was white. Because I didn't want to be that, whatever it was. I mean, I wasn't totally cognizant of what it all meant, you know, as a child that young, you know. But I knew I didn't want to be white.
Yes. And was it like this going through adolescence? I mean,
yes, and I was telling about self-hating black people. When I was in the 5th grade, there was a teacher in our school who really hated herself. She was dark and she would put powder on her so that it's like white chalky powder all over her face. And one day I went into the bath, I was in the bathroom, and there were some twins that went to our school that had beautiful, you know, like Indian type hair, long hair down, you know, to their butts and all. And she just loved those girls. And so one day I was in the bathroom and I heard her yelling at someone. And I came out, and it was a very dark girl with kinky hair that she was just yelling at, like in a really horrible way. And I stood up for the girl. I mean, I was only, what, 8 or 9 years old. But I was really upset by it. And then she reported me to the principal, you know, and they chastised me. And I was on this thing called the safety patrol, you know, you go outside. They took my safety thing away, And anyway, I went home and I told my mom, and my mom went up there and, you know, gave them the riot act, really, you know, so that incident happened, you know, so things like that were going on, you know, like being light-skinned with long hair was praised, you know, and there was a saying, if you're white, you're right, if you're brown, stick around, if you're black, get back. That was the saying, you know, like we had lots of little sayings, like, you know, because black people make jokes of things, you know, just to make things better. Yeah.
It's amazing how much color.
Yes, it's so ridiculous, isn't it?
It is ridiculous.
It's just absurd.
It becomes such an issue, and it's understandable why young people would feel, you know, or even the teacher who wants to self-hate.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
That, I mean, it's understandable because you're faced with such a violent society
Yes.
in that regard.
Yes, there's a lot of fear, you know,
Exactly.
a lot of fear, you know, like, you know, fear from violence, fear from just being treated badly, fear from exclusion, and just everything else, you know, just being made to feel bad about who you are, you know, just for being alive, you know? Yeah, so.
And what was it like, for example, after school? I mean, can you just talk, what was the neighborhood like?
Well, after school was very dramatic, especially in junior high school. You had to make sure that you got home safely because people just wanted to fight. And we had to walk a really long way to school. So it was like, you know, there were just people who wanted to fight you. And for no reason, like they didn't like, you know, they didn't like how you looked, or they were jealous of you, or whatever it was, you know. And so generally that didn't happen to me. I kind of escaped that mostly, but then there was a period where it did happen. My best friend and I, these girls just wanted to beat us up. We had no idea why. You know, and for instance, there were two girls in our class who were really beautiful. Their mothers were single parents, and they came to school dressed really well. They were like the object of so much aggression and hate that the teacher had to send them home early every day so people wouldn't try to beat them up. So there was like these jealousies, and you know, because of the strata, you know, there were different strata of people all at our school, you know, like lower class, middle class, you know, and so there was a lot of resentment, you know, by lower class people against people who looked like they had something, or, you know, the expression was, well, she just thinks she's cute, you know, and we're just gonna beat her ass.
Right.
So that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And at one point, I started carrying a knife, you know. And I just thought, well, you know, if somebody comes, I'm just going to do something. And then my mother found out and took it away from me.
Was high school better?
High school was way better.
Adolescence is always
Adolescence was crazy. You know, we had our good moments, though, you know. Yeah. So.
Any other memories from adolescence, from the school?
Well, you know, I had friends that were, you know, like really close. Like I had my best friend and I in the 7th grade. We liked jazz, and our parents, you know, played jazz in our house. So I would leave early to go down to her house, and we would play jazz and cook things before we went to school. You know, yeah, and then we would leave for school. You know,
Excellent.
and so that was a fun memory. And and then I liked to go to the movies a lot. I would go to matinees on Saturday and had friends. And if the friends didn't go, I would just go by myself. And I loved musicals at that time. I don't like them so much now.
I know. Yes.
Yeah, but I did love them when I was a kid.
So movies were, you got all kinds of the common movies that were played in other theaters.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Yeah.
There were 2 or 3 theaters in our area. Theaters were segregated, you know.
Sure. No, I mean, it's, as you mentioned, you were in a bubble, so to speak, that was segregated.
Yeah,
It was all
yeah,
African
yeah.
American.
But we saw all the, you know, when the movies
Yeah,
came
all
out,
the-
we saw
sure,
them. Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Let's see, was that the time, what were some of the, Harry Belafonte was in some musical.
It was,
What was
well,
that?
he was in Carmen Jones.
Carmen Jones, yes. So things like
Yeah,
that, it was nice,
yeah.
nice, yeah.
Yeah, we were all
Yes.
excited about that movie.
Of course. It was actually a good movie.
Yeah, it was a very good movie. I've looked at it several times in
Yes,
my life.
I bought it for a friend of mine who in Israel.
Okay.
He wanted a copy of
Okay,
it. So,
yeah, yeah.
Okay, so high school then, things were a little better.
Things were better. At
In
first,
terms
I
of-
had to travel to get into McKinley, you had to apply.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you lived in the district, it was considered
Yeah, it was.
a technical high school. So I got in, and at first I had to travel all the way from southeast to northeast to go to school. And then we moved to northwest, and it was a little closer then. I mean, I still had to take the bus, but it wasn't as far.
What was that transition like?
It was great, actually. Well, it was
You were just smart. you needed that challenge.
I did.
Yeah.
And it was a relief to get out of the neighborhood because I was sexually assaulted. And, the boys lived in my neighborhood. And, I would see them. We reported it to the police, but they really didn't do anything. And so I would see them, and, it was very bad all around. And then that happened in the summer, and in the fall we moved to Northwest, which was a big relief to me.
Sure.
And then going to the school was great because it was exciting. McKinley was exciting. They had this plaza on the back part of the school, which you kind of came up to, and all the kids would hang out on the plaza. And my older cousin was a senior there, and so he introduced me to people and all that.
Nice.
Yeah, and so it was a great school, a really great school.
And it was rigorous, I sense.
Yes, rigorous.
Because you had to get-
And I'm still friends with all my classmates from there, and
Wonderful.
they send me emails and stuff. It was a good school.
Nice. And then on to Howard.
And then on to Howard.
And we were talking about Howard. I was just, can you describe your professors? What was
Wow.
anything that jumps out?
Well, when I first, Howard also was a party school.
Okay, well, sure.
People came there to party, and I wasn't into that. I wasn't into parties or sororities or any of that stuff. I was there as a student,
Yeah.
So that whole atmosphere was
What did
happening.
you study?
At first, I was just going to do liberal arts because I was thinking of becoming a dentist. I had thought about that since I was in the 8th grade, but then I changed my mind because I was always very artistic, so I decided to major in art.
Nice.
So I was an art major.
Do you remember a professor by the name of Alan Locke?
Locke?
Yeah.
Yeah, Alan Locke was a contemporary of my grandfather.
Ah, okay.
They were friends.
Okay.
They established the Howard Players
That's what I was
at
wondering.
Howard University.
Okay. Very
Yeah,
nice.
yeah. And so then I transferred to the College of Fine Arts.
Okay.
And so we had a very esteemed faculty there. The head of the department, how come I can't think of his name? I'm having a senior moment. I'll think of it in a minute. And David Driscoll, who's a very well-known painter, was one of my teachers.
From the University of
Yeah.
Maryland.
And, Robert Porter, that was the name of it. Professor Porter was the head of the school, and his wife, Dorothy Porter, was over a room in the library called the Moreland Foundation, which had all of the African and Black literature, and I worked for her. Like I was on a student work program, scholarship. You work and you pay some of your tuition.
Work study.
Yeah, work study.
Like that, yeah.
So I worked for her at the library, and I'm trying to remember. Henry Wells was there. He was the print person. He was very prominent. I'm trying to remember names now. But we had great professors. we had great professors, and
And what is your area, your artistic expression?
well, I do paint, but I back then, Black people we were taught to think in a really narrow way because things weren't available to us. Like people would say, well, you can't make money being an artist. So I decided to be an art teacher when I graduated. So I did art education, and I minored in art history. But I also took lots of painting classes and print classes and stuff. Yeah.
But then later on, did you start painting?
I did. I'm painting now. But it was a big gap when I was working in the work
Yes,
world.
yes,
I couldn't compartmentalize that way somehow, my energy.
So Howard was a good experience.
And that's where I really got into the civil rights movement.
This is what we were going to talk about.
The way I first got into it was I heard about the March on Washington in 1963, and I went down there and I started working in the office, to, setting up the march and working, coordinating everything.
Explain that to people that may not know what that is.
That
march.
the March on Washington, Martin Luther King planned the March on Washington for freedom because, there was lots of oppression against black people, and he wanted this big demonstration, and thousands of people came, very prominent, everybody, you saw that. And so I worked on that, and then I began.
You were how old then? Roughly.
I went to college early. I was 16 when I went to college. So I guess I was 17.
Wow.
Yeah. I hadn't turned 18 yet. I turned 18 later that year.
So you worked for this,
I worked,
preparing this march?
Worked in the office down there. And it was really exciting, when it all happened. And I met everybody like Bayard Rustin and people like that, and I met people from SNCC. They were, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
Oh, okay, yes.
So I met those people there, and then later found out they had a chapter on Howard's campus called the Nonviolent Action Group. So I joined them, and then later I was in SNCC. So I did a lot of work with them. I worked for SNCC in 2 of their offices in DC. And when the Freedom Summer happened, when they killed the 3 civil rights workers, I was working in the office in Washington. My job was to coordinate telling the Justice Department about events that were happening in Mississippi, so that the FBI could do something about, I had a direct line to Nicholas Katzenbach's office. He was the Attorney General. And so I would report these things, and then I went to Atlantic City when they had the Democratic Convention in 1964 and worked at the office up there. And that was when I was in the office when we got the news that they found the bodies, like they called. And I think I don't know if it was Schwerner or Goodman's wife was there at the time. It was just awful. They finally found the bodies, pulled the car up out of the river.
Yeah. Miss Gregory, that was a tough time.
It was a tough time. It was a tough time, but it was an interesting time because we felt like we were doing something, we were involved in lots of demonstrations, like we went down to the eastern shore of Maryland, which was very racist down there. We did a lot of demonstrations down there and got tear gassed and stuff. And, so there was a lot of action happening at the time. I didn't go to Mississippi. My mother was terrified, and so I just didn't go. She couldn't take it.
Did you have friends who went to
Yes.
Mississippi? A lot?
Many friends went to Mississippi.
DC.
My best friend went down there. But lots of people in our group went there. Like when I was at Howard, people went on the freedom rides. Stokely Carmichael was a friend of mine. His girlfriend went on the freedom rides. So
Carmichael,
yeah,
about that.
yeah, there was a lot going on. Yeah, so
So when the march, when they came to DC, you were right there doing. This was when
Yeah.
Mahalia Jackson. Is that the one?
yeah, what she sang.
When she sang,
Yeah,
right next to her. That must have been quite extraordinary.
It really was.
Can you tell us how did you feel about that?
Well, first of all, I felt really encouraged by the number of people that came to the march and the fact that it was, all kinds of people.
Yes, absolutely.
The
whites,
yes,
there were quite a few,
yes,
right?
yes.
It was, and others.
Yes,
and others.
yes.
Other
And it was very well organized. There wasn't a lot of crazy stuff that happened there. The speeches and everything. It was momentous.
Absolutely.
Yeah. At the
Did
time,
you meet Dr. King?
I met him once in the
Really?
there was a big tent. That's where the coordinators were, you know, but it was very brief, and I mean, it was like not really meeting him. So
Was he with his wife? Who was he with?
he was the other speakers, like he was with Bayard Rustin, and it was with Bayard Rustin and what's his name? The railroad guy. I can't think of his name. A. Philip Randolph, and he was with the group. They were talking, you know, yeah. So I didn't really. It wasn't really like a momentous meeting or anything.
But what did you think of that day, that event? What was it like
It was,
for you?
well, first of all, it was in the summer, and I was working at a summer job for the Department of Marines. I was the only black person, little, you know, typing away. And they were all, you know, in a group of, like, you know, white men and women. And I told them I was going to take the day off, and I was going to this march. And they were like, you know, white people were kind of afraid of it, you know, the people that weren't, you know, like into what was going on. And so, you know, I went. Nobody asked me about it when I came back the next day. But, you know, we all knew it was a big thing. You know, it was a big thing, and it went well, you know, and it had a big impact.
But you must have been thrilled.
Huh?
You must have been thrilled to be there, no? Or what was it?
I don't know if I felt thrilled or just, I felt like I was doing something important.
Okay. Yes.
You know?
Yes.
Yeah. And, you know, looking back was kind of thrilling. Oh, yeah, I was there.
Yeah, of course. No, I know. No, but the fact that you were actually working for the office.
Yeah.
And you were so young.
Yeah,
I was young.
I was young.
But there must have been pride in the family that you were.
We were all young, you know, like we were all young, all the kids, you know. I guess I was younger than a lot of them.
Yes, yeah.
My family didn't know what to think. You know, all of this was new. This kind of, a lot of black people were afraid of people making waves.
Of course. Yeah.
My family wasn't particularly afraid of anybody making waves, but, you know, it was also just new to them that this was happening. You know, this kind of thing was happening. And, you know, it just kind of went on from there, didn't it? After that, you know, it just kept expanding.
Yeah. And so what were you doing during that period where Dr. King was, you know, engaged in so many strategic plans for the civil rights?
I was with SNCC, and so we were doing our thing, you know, that whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and, you know, like I worked with Marion Barry in the SNCC office.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, you know, we were just all working on different projects, you know, like that had to do with civil rights.
And can you tell us a little bit about what the reaction was when Dr. King was assassinated?
By that time, I was in Berkeley.
Okay, then
Yeah.
let's now. So you are at Howard. You finish your undergraduate, and then you apply for graduate school.
No, I didn't go to Berkeley. I was living in
Oh,
Berkeley.
you lived in Berkeley. I see. So you moved to Berkeley.
We moved here. We lived down here for a few months.
Who's we?
My husband. We weren't married. We were at that point.
Sure.
We were together, and we came to visit California during the summer of love.
Okay.
And we decided we were going to go back there, right? You know, and so when I graduated, you know, like he came out first, and then I came out.
What years are you between?
68.
Okay.
It was came here January of 68, and then we moved up to Berkeley in April of 68.
Why Berkeley?
Why did we go to Berkeley? Well, we had a friend whose brother lived in Berkeley. We just decided we were going to leave LA. I can't remember why.
That's all right. Okay.
We were young, and, you know.
Sure.
So we decided we were going to go to Berkeley because
Okay.
because we had a friend who had a brother in Berkeley.
All right.
So we went and we stayed at his house for a while, and then we got our own place, and we stayed there. And that's when we heard about Dr. King, because he was killed in April of '68. So it was not long after we got to Berkeley that he was killed. It was so upsetting, you know. It was very, very upsetting. And, you know, then of course we saw that all the cities were exploding, you know, which, you know, was inevitable, so to speak. And, you know, we weren't surprised by it, we were horrified by it. That's, you know, I mean, he knew that he was that he was the target of you know, violence. He knew that they were after him. He said it many times, you know, that he knew it. But it was just upsetting, you know, the whole way that it happened. And
well, there was a wave of violence.
A wave of
against,
violence.
African American leaders, Evers and Malcolm X,
Yeah.
and on and on.
On and on, like, you know, Malcolm, when Malcolm X got killed, you know, like, that was really upsetting. Then Martin Luther King, and then Robert Kennedy. It just kept going, you know.
Yeah. But I wondered if you could tell me what was the African community going through? Because now it's beyond just living separate, right?
Right.
It's things are changing. What was it like for you? What was it like for those around you? That period.
Like seeing the changes, you mean?
Yes, yes. Was there a lot? Was there anxiety? Was there? What were the feelings?
All of the above. You know, there was. People were excited that they had access to things they didn't have access to before, like, you know, neighborhoods and stores and, you know, things like that. But, you know, but then all of our black businesses, you know, bit the dust, and our neighborhoods got, you know, decimated, you know, and, you know, that happened. We were aware of that.
But that's really important. This
It is very
transition,
important.
because now here was a black community that was self-contained.
Yes.
In every way.
Yeah.
Education, healthcare, I imagine.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
Economics.
Yes.
Businesses, in every way.
In every way.
It was a self-contained community.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, gradually, it's beginning to.
Gradually, in a way, it was gradual. So it wasn't
Yeah.
like this sudden thing. It was gradual because they weren't ready for it. You know, it's not like it was like, you know, when slavery ended. You know, they weren't ready for people to be free. They weren't ready. Yes.
Yes.
So they weren't ready for us to just have access to everything.
No.
You know, it was like it was rough going there for a while.
What was that like? I mean, do you have memories of that? Because you just said black businesses were going out of business.
Yeah, we were really upset about losing businesses. You know, in a way, it was more retrospective, where we look back and we saw, oh, all this happened as a result of that. You know, and while it was happening, I think we were not aware exactly of how it was happening. It was like after it happened, we saw, you know, that we didn't have communities that we had before. There's a great movie called, oh gosh, I'll think of it in a minute. But it kind of shows that. It's a fictional movie, but it shows this vibrant black community, and then now, you know, all the stores are boarded up and all this stuff. Lackawanna Blues is the name of the movie. It's a community in New York, you know, that was black, and you know, and everybody went away. They go away, you know, so they, yeah.
And what happened in D.C.?
It took a while for D.C. to.
Okay.
It took a long while, you know, like nothing really shifted, like immediately or anything. It really started to happen in D.C. like in the 90s, I think.
D.C. is a unique place.
Yeah,
in that regard.
yeah.
And I hear that it was really not until the 90s.
Yeah, my stepfather began to lament it. He says, we're losing our black base, everybody's going, like living out in Prince George's County, which we couldn't live in before, you know. And so,
couldn't live in.
No, it was segregated out there before. You know, so now they're all out there, and he just was upset about the whole thing, you know, yeah.
So really moving out of segregation took its toll.
It did take its toll. You know, like Because see, I left in '68. A whole bunch of changes in DC had not happened.
Right, right.
You know,
Yeah.
so you know, like the changes, like the riot that happened after Dr. King died. You know, in DC, they kind of destroyed 14th Street. You know, and
Wasn't Adams Morgan? a part
Adams
of that
Morgan
too?
was kind of it wasn't really affected.
It wasn't. Oh, okay. Because at some point Adams Morgan.
it was-
one of the. Yeah.
Okay.
But it was 14th Street.
14th Street was the
Okay.
one that got it.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, so then you moved to California.
I want to say one more
Yeah,
thing
please.
too about this. Like growing up, it was like a really kind of a myopic view about race. You were either black or you were white or you were a foreigner.
Right.
You know?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Alien.
Yes. So anyway, so yeah, I left in '68, and you know, like LA was, you know, way more integrated and you know,
course,
people
of
moving around.
course.
But when I first came to LA, you know, we didn't hang out with white people either. You know, so we, you know, there were black people we knew here,
Yes.
and
Where were you in LA?
we lived when we first came here in '68. We lived out near Imperial Highway, and I don't even know where that is right now.
I know I know
Yeah.
of it. Yes.
Then we kind of moved down into the Adams area. We lived in the Adams area.
Downtown.
Yeah, like,
Yeah.
well, it's
Or-
not, I don't know if it's downtown.
Is
It's like a black area. Adams.
Near USC?
And no.
Adams.
It's
Okay.
like what's over that way? They call it the Adams area. I'm trying to think of other streets that are over there, but I can't.
But it was a predominantly black
It
area.
was predominantly black, but they were white. It was integrated too.
Sure.
Like, you know, we had a neighbor, a white neighbor that we used to spend time with. So they were, you know, it was more integrated
Yeah.
than what I was
What was
used
that
to.
like for you to move into a place like this?
Well, you know, I had been around white people in the civil
Sure.
rights movement, so that was,
Yeah.
so I, you know, they weren't that foreign to me at that point.
Is that one the first time you
That's what I
spent?
first had.
When you were like 17, 18?
Yeah, that's when I first met white people and had relationships
okay,
with white
okay,
people.
interesting.
The people that were in the civil rights movement.
Right.
You know, a lot of Jewish people, a lot of, you know,
Yes,
like
yes.
educated white people. Yeah. And so, you know, just, the Adams area was mostly black, but there were other people living there. For instance, our white neighbor was married to a black man. So, you know, it was, yeah, you know, so, and then we came back to DC at the end of '68 and got married there. Yeah,
Nice.
yeah.
Okay.
And it was a whole different kind of vibe happening there then too. You know, there was a group I got involved in, you know, like before we left the first time, and then I knew them when we came back. They were like a really militant group, guns and all that. Yeah, and they were like in full expression at that point. Lots of intrigue going on. Undercover agents, you know, were planted, and you know, and when we came out to California, I didn't join the Panthers, but I knew a lot of them, and I spent time with them, and so that, and also spent time with the US organization down here in LA. You know, so there was a lot of infiltration by the government in these groups. You know, these people, a lot of them turned out to be plants, and so they were. You know, we found out who some of them were, and.
The US organization, I don't know.
There was a professor named Ron Karenga at UCLA, and he created a group called the US Group, US organization. And they were sort of like, the Panthers were more ideological people, political people. You know, they weren't necessarily just black separatists. Even though they were all black, they weren't into black separatism. They just wanted, you know, us to be treated right.
Right, yeah.
Karenga's group was what we called cultural activists. You know, like he's the one that created Kwanzaa.
Oh, I thought so.
Yeah.
I was going to ask. Okay.
Yeah, so I knew them and everything.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay.
So, you know, there were different groups of people doing
Yes,
different
yes,
things,
yes,
you know.
And then, so California was really different.
California
Yeah.
was kind of different.
And Berkeley was more liberal than LA, or about the same? Or what was it like?
You know, yeah, Berkeley was more liberal than LA. But Berkeley also wasn't as liberal as everybody thought. And still isn't.
And still isn't, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the problem
Uh-huh.
with the illusions.
Yes,
that people
yes,
have.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Interesting.
Yeah, so
Mm.
you know, after getting married, we didn't have children right away, you know, but then we did. And then Stokely kept trying to get me to come back and do things. And I said, well, you know, I'm married now.
Talk about that.
Well, you know, Stokely and I, we were friends. And, you know, we were all, you know, we were in the group together. I met him at Howard.
Oh, okay. Yes, yes, okay.
Stokely, Rap Brown, you know,
Yes.
Ed Brown, his brother,
Yeah.
you know, and Cortland Cox and all those, you know,
Yes.
they were all going to school at the same time.
So he wanted you to do what?
Well, you know, he had left, you know, he had married Miriam Makeba and he had left the United States and gone to Mali. And he got into Pan-Africanism. He really wanted, you know, to go in that direction. He was trying to get me to you know, to be involved in all that and come. And I said, well, you know, I'm a mother now. I mean, some people can do that sort of thing, but not me, you know, like I just, so I didn't, you know, and I kind of lost touch with him, you know.
Nice. And then how long were you in Berkeley?
I was only in Berkeley, well, then we came back, see.
Okay, yes.
Let me get this together in my head. After we got married, on the spur of the moment, my husband decides that he's going to come back to California, that we're going to go back to California. And so I think he's coming back to LA, but he went to San Francisco. And he said, we're going to live in San Francisco. And I said, but it's so cold and dreary. He said, no, you're going to love it, you're going to love it, which I finally did. So that's how, yeah, and then later on, you know, like we moved over to the East Bay. So, you know, after that point, we just lived in the Bay Area.
I want to add emotions, the emotional aspect. So you had this amazing experience living in a highly African American, you know, bubble or segregated, but highly integrated in some ways, community. But then you leave it.
Yeah.
There must have been times where you were treated a certain way as you traveled to these other and lived in other parts of the country. I mean, can you talk about
Not really.
No?
I mean, I had one incident which kind of shocked me. We were living in the East Bay. No, we were living in San Francisco, and I had a job in the East Bay. And I was coming out of the bus terminal, and I was kind of unfamiliar with the area, and this guy was walking by, and I was trying to ask him for direction. And he just turned around and just spewed all this racial hate at me. And I didn't expect that, like in San Francisco, you know. So something like that happened, but it didn't happen very often, you know. But I did want to tell you this, that later I became very involved in meditation. So it was a group of black people, once again. And, you know, in LA I had met a guy who was like into Rosicrucianism, and then he got into transcendental meditation. And also a friend of ours that lived behind us. So they were telling us about the meditation and all that. And so we got curious about it. And then when we moved back east, we went to New York first, and we got initiated into TM, Transcendental Meditation. And then later, in '73, I think it was, we all went to Ethiopia, a group of African American, well, it was actually people of color, because there were a couple of Chinese women and a Korean woman, and all the rest of us were black. We went to Ethiopia Went to Ethiopia to study to be meditation teachers. And Maharishi came up there.
Okay.
Yeah. So that I got into meditation, and I did that for several years, and then I met Muktananda. I don't know if you know Muktananda. He's a guru from India who came to the U.S. and so then I started following him, and I went to India to study under him. And so I do know about Bahá'í because I had a friend that was a Bahá'í.
Who was that?
His name was Jimmy. He lived down here in L.A. and I've lost touch with him. It was like in '68. I haven't seen him since then. You know, he used to talk to us about it. You know, tried to get us to get into it. At that time, we weren't into anything like that. You know, yeah.
No, I understand. Actually, you didn't talk about church in Washington, D.C.
Well, I have to tell you this. My family was not a church-going family.
Okay, all right.
I, on the other hand, would go to church every Sunday all by myself.
Searching. Oh,
Yeah, I was
nice.
searching. I would go all these different churches, just trying to find God. You know.
And what were the churches you'd go to?
I went to all of them. I went to Baptist churches. I went to Holy Roller churches. I went to an Episcopalian church. I finally decided I would be a Presbyterian because it appealed to my intellect.
Yes, that makes sense.
You know, yeah. I liked the music in the other places, but I didn't like the kind of crazy energy.
But TM, Transcendental Meditation, was also nice, right?
Yes, very nice. Yes. So I'm still a meditator, you know, and
That's wonderful.
but yeah, there was a group of black people that went to Ethiopia and studied at this mountain college that was in the mountains.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to ask a series of questions
Okay.
that I don't want to miss.
Okay.
So, I'm going to read it out and then we can decide.
Okay.
Do you feel the way your own marriage, relationships, choices of living, or enthusiasms and disciplines are mostly similar to the values you had when you grew up? Different? If so, how and why? What has endured and what has been replaced, and how did you come to know or to choose what would be preserved and what would be removed?
Wow, that's complex.
And I'm happy to repeat it if you'd like. So.
Okay. What became different and what remained the same? I feel like the values were always kind of the same. You know, I feel very fortunate to have grown up in the family that I grew up in, because you know there was lots of intellectual curiosity. You know, there was a lot of fun. You know, and there were big personalities and all. You know.
There was a lot of love, it seems.
A lot of love.
Yeah.
A lot of love. And so I'm not sure that anything changed in terms of my values or anything.
So you held on to
I
that
held on. You know, we had a wide worldview, so there wasn't this kind of narrow thing going on.
Yeah.
You know.
Sure.
The only thing that felt narrow to me was the confinement about what I would do with my life, because there just opportunities weren't there. You know, you would either be a teacher or, you know, a nurse or something like that. You know, just there weren't a lot of opportunities presented.
But you were aware of that.
I was aware of it.
Yeah.
You know, like when I kept telling
In
people.
other words, you knew that there were
Yes, I knew.
opportunities that were close to you because of your stature, status in this country.
Exactly.
As an African American.
I knew that. So.
And you wanted more.
Yeah, I did want more. You know, like for instance, when I tried to first get a job out here, I wanted to, because I had an art degree, I wanted to work in some art affiliated thing. I didn't really want to teach right then. So I tried to get a job like in a display department in department stores, you know, and there was not just racism, there was misogyny. They didn't want to hire women, they didn't want to hire black people. You know, I tried to become like a buyer for a department store. You know, you don't know, they don't say it right out, but you know, like in the South, you know what they're thinking. In the North, you don't know what they're thinking.
Exactly, yes, yes.
So I that was really disappointing, that I couldn't really do something like that. you know. So I did teach for a year. I taught art for a year in a public school, and then I had my baby, and I was I was out of the workforce for about 7 years with my children. Yeah.
How many children?
2.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Daughters?
2 girls.
2 girls.
Mm-hmm.
Very nice.
Mm-hmm.
So the opportunities, it was obvious.
Yeah, it was obvious the opportunities.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we couldn't even.
Racism and misogyny.
Yeah, and I mean, to the point where we couldn't even imagine doing something different. You know what I mean? If we imagined it, then it wasn't possible.
Sure.
You know, or so we believed. Some people kind of broke through it, I guess. You know, but mostly, you know, we just saw the line. The rigid lines were there. You know. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then, in what ways would you say life today is more satisfying than in the days when your parents were your age? And in what ways less satisfying?
Oh, more satisfying because there are more things available to us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, things that my parents couldn't do. Like, for instance, you know, my uncles. You know, like my uncles went to MIT and Harvard, and they wound up. You know, like I had my one uncle was a physicist. He couldn't work in his field. He had to be a shop teacher. Stuff like this. I was aware that my uncles had this education they could do nothing with.
So after MIT,
Yeah,
he's a physicist.
yeah.
And he
No
can't
work.
learn-
No work. You know, so we were aware of these things. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so, and then how do you think life today is harder for children, African American? What do you think they are missing that your generation had?
Okay. One of the things I want to say is that I don't feel that much has changed. It just looks, the way it's happening is different. Because white people don't want to give up their whiteness. They just don't want to give it up. And so they're holding on to it. And so the black children today are acutely aware, I think much more than we were, of all the stuff that's happening, because, you know, it's coming to them. It's coming to them constantly. And they feel very insecure, you know. I'm very proud of a lot of the young people, you know, what they're doing now. You know, they're really conscious, you know, and they're afraid of the environment and everything else that's happening. And they're aware of the police brutality, whereas before they didn't believe us when we talked about this stuff. So they're aware of that. And it's kind of, it's sad because I don't think they have a childhood. They can't play like we used to. We used to play unsupervised all day long. You know, like we would go places. I mean, like, you know, we didn't have a lot of structure, like, you know, telling us that we had to be in a car going to a soccer field or something. We just played, and there was a lot of freedom in that I think they don't have. You know, they're afraid a lot. You know, yeah. And that's very sad.
It's a much more insecure feeling these days than before, you were suggesting. Yeah. And then, what changes would you like to see that would benefit the younger generation?
Wow.
Sorry.
Everything.
I need to hear your perspective on this because it's important.
You know, I just wish we could get rid of racism. I really wish that people could just let go of, you know, it's getting worse is what it's doing. It's getting a lot worse. It's not getting better.
Please explain that.
You know, it's like this division that's happening. It's like they're trying to take us back to like the 1800s, you know, in terms of race, in terms of women. And there's this Christian craziness that's just, and I think they're not Christians really, they're just crazy people that are using Christianity as a front for their terrible feelings, you know. And I wish that we could do something about that. I don't have any faith that we can do anything about it because they just dig their heels in and just, you know, they're not giving it up. And I think that would be so freeing. I'd like to see that happen, and I'd like to see people really take seriously what's happening to the environment. You know, these are and then the whole gun thing. I mean, really, it's just not happening anywhere else in the world.
But you said you feel that it's becoming more racist. the country?
You know, I'm not sure it's becoming more racist. I think that what happened was that people on the left, you know, we make these achievements and then we just are so happy, and then, you know, we think that's going to be it. Meanwhile, these people have never given up. They're just constantly, they don't give up. And so it just, what happened was they were underground for a long time. And they were freed by Donald Trump, you know, to say and do whatever it is that they feel like saying and doing. And so it's just things that they would say just to themselves, they're saying out loud. You know, and everybody's shocked, you know, and I'm going, well, you know, it was like that. And then, you know, they're feeling, I think the shock to me is a lot of people thought that certain educated people wouldn't go that way, but a lot of them did. It's not all knuckle draggers over there, you know.
No.
Yeah,
That's true.
you know, so they're just clinging to what they think is their superiority, and they're not letting go of that.
It's like, I mean, this is really one of the wounds of America.
It is the big wound.
That just does not get healed.
It doesn't get healed. You know, it doesn't get healed. And you know, you just go back to the beginning of it. You know, they came in and they wiped out all the native people, you know, and took all their stuff. And that's the way that they roll. You know, so they just kept doing this stuff. And they just really believe in their superiority, even when they don't have anything, not a brain in their head or whatever. You know, they still have that. You know, they still have their whiteness that they can cling to. And it's very sad to me. And is it more racist? I think the expression, for years we didn't have this, you know, I kind of grew up with the expression where everybody was saying it, you know, in the South, you know, that's what I used to say, because my husband was like my father. He never wanted to go south. He never wanted to go there. And I said, you know, well, you know, in the South, you know what they're thinking. In the North, you know, they're thinking the same thing, but they're smiling at you, you know. And so what it is that everybody's just getting to express their feelings. And a lot of people might not have known that they felt that way, but lots of stuff was happening that looked seductive to them, and then they felt threatened, you know, because they don't know us. They just don't know us. We know them a lot better than they know us, you know. So we're this other thing that they're terribly afraid of, and they created a monster, really. They brought us over here, did all this stuff, you know, and then we're just supposed to smile about it, you know, like, you know, we're never supposed to be angry, you know. We're just supposed to take it. And so people stopped taking it, and now they're rising up, and I just can't imagine how it's all going to work out. I don't have a lot of faith in it.
It's so deep.
It's very deep.
So deep.
It's very disturbing and very deep. You know, like when Trump first came on the scene, I was fanatically looking at MSNBC all day long, and I thought, I've got to stop looking at this stuff. It's making me sick. So I just stopped. Haven't looked at that news. I mean, I'm not unaware, but I'm just not looking at that. That was just too much,
Yes,
you know.
I understand.
And
So you think, as you mentioned, it's really hard on young Africans?
it's very hard on them, you know. Like
Because they're bombarded.
they're bombarded constantly with it, you know. And so, you know, like some of them don't really know the history, and they're trying to learn it now. The ones that are conscious are trying to learn the history, but a lot of them just don't understand because they haven't been through all that stuff. You know, for a while everybody thought everything was okay, but it's not okay. It's never been okay. It's just been under the surface.
Yes. So what stories of your life would you like someone to know that shed light on what has meant most to you? In other words, what stories of your life would you like someone to know that shed light on what has meant most to you? And in keeping in mind even African American youngsters, but also the rest of the country.
Yeah, what has meant the most to me? Well, when I met my guru, that was a very big event for me.
What happened? What did
Well, I don't know how to explain all this, but
Sure.
he was He was not just a spiritual teacher, he was a person that could transmit spiritual energy. It's called Shaktipat, awaken your Kundalini. So that was an experience that I had. My Kundalini was awakened by my guru. That was a big
Which is a
event.
spiritual
Yes.
journey.
That meant a lot to me. Being in the civil rights movement meant a lot to me, and meeting people there and creating something there. I felt like, because I always had an acute sense of justice, you know, and yeah.
Sure.
And my children are they mean a lot to me. I'm very proud of my children.
Can you say a little bit?
Yeah.
Would you like to share a little bit about
Sure.
them? Yeah.
My oldest daughter, Aisha, she's an actress and a director and a writer, and she's a very dynamic person. And she's very wonderful. She's just a very sweet person.
Excellent.
And then my youngest daughter, her name is Fedi. She is a pioneer, so to speak. She bought some land out in the middle of nowhere to create a place for what she imagines to be a community and her children. I mean, like, there's nothing out there. No water, no nothing, okay? So she's out there. She came out as a lesbian and got married to a woman, which surprised me. And she's got 2 children, and I'm a great grandmother because one of her daughters has 2 children.
Where does she live?
Arizona.
Ah, okay. Okay. But your other daughter is here.
Is here.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Nice.
I'm very proud of them. You know, they're very strong. We brought them up to be independent
How can they
people.
not be? No.
You know, we brought them up to be independent and not, you know, these parents today are just, the children don't know how to tie their shoes, you know.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm very proud of them.
And what about in general?
The other thing I want to
yes,
mention
please.
is my second husband. Well, both of my husbands were great. I'm still friends with my first husband. My second husband passed away, but he had an art gallery that he represented African American artists specifically, and he was well known all over the world. Yeah, and so.
Oh, you have to say more about him.
Yeah,
his name.
His
please.
name was Samuel Fredericks, and he has Samuel's Gallery.
Where?
Was in Oakland for many years, and his family is very interesting. A family of very creative people. His sister was a singer who was very famous in Paris. His brother is a big singer. I don't know if you know of Taj Mahal, but that's his brother.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh
So.
my goodness.
Yeah. So he came from a very interesting family too, you know, and we had a great relationship. You know, he was a wonderful person.
But he represented the African-American
African-American artists.
Oh, what a rich life that would have been. Everywhere.
Yes. You know.
Not just the U.S. or mostly U.S.
Mostly U.S., but you know, it was mostly African Americans. But he had some people from abroad. You know, some African artists too. But he didn't. It wasn't African art. It was African American art. Like,
yes.
you know, going not just contemporary artists, but you know, he had a lot of the Harlem Renaissance original works that he sold. Yeah, he was a connoisseur of art and black film, black film history.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Wow.
I know.
You know, the more I learn about your family, the more I realize how much they have contributed to this world. Honestly, it's wonderful.
It's a good feeling, you know, like I feel very fortunate.
Yeah, and how much, unfortunately, these ignorant people are missing out on, quite frankly.
Yes, when you think about how much better a country this could be if they stopped suppressing everybody.
Absolutely.
You know, like everybody. I mean, like Mexicans, you know, Mexicans are terrific people.
They really are.
Yeah.
No,
I mean,
it's
it's narrow-minded. It's just, you know, it's like cutting off your nose to spite your face. You know, they've cheated themselves
Yes.
of lots of talent. They won't admit that the talent even exists, you know.
And at some level, I think the greatness of America is this diversity.
Absolutely.
It's
I mean,
really the only reason why it's what it is.
it's such a hypocrisy. You know, it's supposed to be a melting pot. It's supposed to be full of
Right,
people. You know, it's not supposed to be white Christian people who,
I know. I know.
can't breathe or whatever.
Is there anything else you'd like to?
My father was a computer programmer way back when IBM first started. He started out.
He went to.
No, what happened was, back then, he was, doing all kinds of jobs, driving a taxi, working in a liquor store, blah, blah, blah. And then he got a job for the U.S. government in their computer. That's when they had computers that took up whole rooms.
Of course, yes.
Yeah, so he
yes.
got a job there. And so he worked there for a while. And then when he and my mother divorced and he moved to New York, he worked for IBM for over 20 years. Yeah, so that's what he did. And my mother, she worked for the government as a secretary in the Navy Department over in Arlington, Virginia. And then later, she quit that to work for my stepfather, who owned a business, a real estate concern. And his family was very interesting because his father started the Black Tennis Association. Yeah, and they were in DC. Yeah, his father. And
Was Arthur Ashe a part of that?
no, this was way.
Before.
He started it way like in the 20s or the 30s.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And he also was a founder of the first black bank in DC, Industrial Bank. He was one of the founding members of that bank because black people couldn't
Yes.
get anything from banks, so they started their own bank. And he was a math teacher, and he was a math teacher in a high school, Armstrong. And then he started, when the war came, he started buying up different property. And that's how he made his money. And then my stepfather went into business with him, when he graduated from, well, he went to law school, and then instead of practicing law, he just went into business with his father.
Where did he go to law school? Do you know?
I don't know, but he went to college. He went to Cornell. And then I think he went to a college in DC, but it wasn't like.
Are these all educational achievements that couldn't go anywhere because of being African American, largely? What do you think?
Well, you mean in that particular case? I don't think so.
No?
No,
Okay.
he could have been a lawyer.
He could.
He just didn't
Okay.
want to practice.
I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
he wanted
Okay.
to
Yeah.
be in business with his father.
Okay.
His father was a lawyer too. They were both lawyers, but they didn't practice,
Yeah.
So his father was really smart. His father had a photographic memory, and he was really a brilliant man.
Wonderful.
Hmm.
And are you doing anything with your artwork? What?
Well, I just started painting again, and I'm facing huge blocks. Because I didn't paint for like 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I wanted to get back to it. So, I'm getting back to it now, and it's just,
That's really
trying to take it as it comes.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Wow. If there anything else, I mean, I don't want to.
We have artists in our family, like,
Wow.
Chico's sister, Wendy.
I don't know.
She's a big painter. And
Really? Wow.
then we have another cousin, Hugh. His daughter, Jasmine, lives in Germany, and she's doing really well there in museums and stuff over there.
Nice.
She's going to be in the Biennale. I saw we were in Europe. I saw the Biennale in June.
beautiful.
Yeah, it was so great.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Her art must be extraordinary.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Like I've seen a few pieces, and I feel jealous. She's doing really well.
Nice.
Yeah. So we have artists. Wendy is a fantastic artist.